Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today I have a new kind of video for you, and it is a birth story. Just a story about my labor and delivery with my newest son. I just recently delivered my youngest son. His name is Dean Andrew Amido, and he was born on the 24th of May. And so I've kind of been on a hiatus just because, one, I was feeling kind of not very inspired, just being super huge, super pregnant. But then also I had a pretty rough labor and delivery actually. And so I needed some time to kind of like recover, regroup. So today I just want to talk about kind of what all happened. It's kind of like a life update a little bit because some of this stuff I'm still dealing with, and I think it'll be a fun and entertaining story, and also probably a little bit educational because there's stuff that went down that I didn't know could happen to me. So grab a snack, grab a cup of coffee, and let's jump into it. So going into my labor and delivery with my son, I intended on doing a TOLAC, which is a trial of labor after cesarean. I made it very clear to my midwife that I wanted to trial labor and try to have a vaginal birth. My first son was born via cesarean because him and my cervix weren't playing nicely together. With him, there was just a section of my cervix that wouldn't flatten, and he was a little cattywampus, and those two things together led me to a cesarean. It was non-emergent, neither of us were in distress. And so after having that cesarean and talking to so many OBs and midwives that really encouraged me to try to do a VBAC, which is now called a TOLAC, I wanted to give it a try, obviously, because cesarean recovery is like no joke. So that's what I intended on doing. And my midwife shared with me that my percentage of success or chances of success would go up if I went into labor on my own. And so that was something that didn't happen with my first son. I had to be induced. And so basically the tail end of my pregnancy with Dean, my second son, was just trying to go into labor. I was trying a lot of different things, and I know trying those like old wives' tales is part of the fun of being pregnant and like trying to go into labor on your own. It's part of like, I don't know, I just think it's like almost like tradition. Like you just do these fun things that like could help, maybe don't help, but it's still fun. I was eating a lot of pineapple. I was using evening primrose oil capsules, like I was inserting them and also taking them orally. I went on a lot of walks. I was still very, very active because I have a toddler. I was drinking tea. I was getting down and dirty with my husband and trying to do all these things, and I wasn't having any progress. And I had a cervical check when I was 38 weeks, and I was about 1 centimeter dilated and naughty faced at all. They couldn't even sweep me, which was very discouraging because I was doing all the things and I was having a lot of pain down there actually. Just like a lot of lightning crotch and a lot of those things that like make you think that you're dilating when you're probably not. So I got rechecked at 39 weeks. I was crossing my fingers for a membrane sweep, which those didn't work with my first son, but I was hopeful with this one just because I felt like there was so much riding on me going into labor on my own in order to make those chances of success as high as possible for me to have a VBAC. So I went in at my 39-week appointment and there was no change. I still couldn't do a membrane sweep because I was so thick still, and I just got really, really frustrated. And like, if you go to my Instagram, if you're not following me on Instagram, you totally should. My handle I will put right here. Actually, my husband will put right here because he's editing this for me. Thanks, babe. I posted something around when I was 39 weeks about how disappointed I was that things were slowly but surely not going my way. I felt like I had a lot riding on me going into labor on my own, and it was like starting to slowly look like that wasn't gonna happen. So at my 40-week appointment, There still was no cervical change, and I ended up talking to my midwife, and we ended up deciding on a date for induction just in case I didn't go into labor on my own. So a couple days after my 40-week appointment, I started having really irregular contractions, and they weren't painful necessarily. They were just kind of like bothersome. They were really weird. They were like, they started off every 8 minutes. And it would go like 8 minutes, 8 minutes, 8 minutes, 13 minutes, 15 minutes. And then they'd go 8, 8, 8, 12. These irregular contractions, they happened for about 12 hours or so. At one point, I started to feel like they were pretty painful. I was having a hard time like talking through them. I actually called labor and delivery and was like, hey, this is how I've been feeling for this long. I've been having contractions for this many hours, and they said to come on in. So I go into labor and delivery. Well, before that, so the tricky thing with our whole labor and delivery story is that obviously we're a military family, and right now we're stationed in Alaska. And so we don't have any family around to take our toddler while we go and get checked or go to the hospital, whatever. And so that was kind of like throwing a kink in our plans, just because it was so complicated, trying to arrange, somebody to like pick Matt up or be with Matt. So the first time we went to the hospital to be checked, one of many, we took Matt with us. And so we get to labor and delivery. I'm in pain. Matt is there with us. We go get checked, and long story short, the nurse tells me that I'm at 3 centimeters. This could be early labor. They were still really, sort of irregular, not super close together in time. And so they sent us home. So she sent us home. It was pretty discouraging, but I honestly didn't even think I was in labor yet. So we came home, and that night I tried to go to sleep, and I couldn't. I was having a hard time sitting down or laying down just because my back was killing me. I think I was having back labor. And it was just very sore and very miserable. The contractions picked up so much that I couldn't think. What ended up happening was we went to the hospital again after 4 hours. Or no, after 6 hours. So I think it was about 10 or 11 at night. My son was asleep in bed, and we called a friend to come over and be with him in the house while we went to the hospital. We went to labor and delivery again, and I was like, hey, I was just here about 6 hours ago. These contractions are killing me. Because it was to the point where like I couldn't settled down. Everything was hurting. I was like pacing my bedroom. Like it was painful enough during each contraction that I would have to like breathe through it, and I was walking the same little triangle in my bedroom, and I was like doing like this on the walls to like try to like distract myself as I was walking by, and I was like breathing and stuff. So at about 10 or 11, I'm assuming, I woke him up and I was like, hey, I think I need to go. This is getting really painful. And getting in the car was the most excruciating part of like almost all of this. And that sounds so silly, but sitting down made the contractions 100 times worse to begin with. But being in the car, like with a seatbelt on to where you can't move, I was like up like this, like yelling because it hurt so bad in the car. And so all of those videos of the women like giving birth in the car, they have like all the props in the world, because that crap hurts. Like that really, really hurts. We get to labor and delivery, and she says, you're still at a 3. And that was like, that sucked. I wanted to cuss. I wanted to cuss at somebody, because I was like, are you kidding me? Like I'm in so much pain. And so we get in the car. I can't believe it. Like Like, I'm in so much pain. We come home and I tell the friend that came over, I'm like, there was no change. I had to like run upstairs whenever we got home and not stay and talk to the person that was over, because I like was like almost at this point like yelling through my contractions, which was really, really unfortunate. I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable because she didn't have children, and I was like let me not like scare her from labor, because I was in a lot of pain. And so I just kind of like was like, I messaged her on our way home and I was like, listen, I cannot stay in the living room and talk to you. I'm running upstairs when I get home because I'm beside myself. And then at about 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., the same thing. I'm like really at my threshold, and I'm like, I can't do this anymore. We pack up again. I have a different friend come over this time, and she comes over, bless her heart, at 2 or 3 a.m. because Matt is still sleeping and still in the house. So a different friend comes over. This point, I have like about 3 or 4 minutes between contractions. And so the funny part about this is that I was like, I do not want to have a contraction in the car because it hurts so bad. I have a contraction right outside the passenger door, and as soon as it's over, I hop in and I'm like, go, go, go. And so he speeds to the hospital. I'm having a contraction as soon as he pulls into a parking spot. So I like get out, trying not to be that mom in the parking lot, but I'm like yelling. I'm like, ah! We go upstairs to labor and delivery, and once again, they check me and they say, you're still at a 3. There's been no change. They're like, a soft 3. So I'm letting this nurse know. I'm like, I'm in so much pain that I don't know what to do with myself. And she's like telling me like, have you tried getting in the shower? Have you tried this? And I'm like, yes, it's not working. Nothing's working. This hurts. She didn't think I was in labor. She thought it was just like really, really early labor. So she comes back and she's like, I got you Percocet. I'm like, oh, I can't. I'm like, I hope this helps. Like, I hope I'm able to sit down. Well, that was at like 2 or 3. So for the next 8 hours or so, I am at home, and I'm still not able to sleep, still not able to settle down. And so what I ended up having to do is, I have a sectional. I had to go into the corner of the sectional on my knees, like sitting on my knees and my heels, leaned on the top of the couch like this, and I would sleep for the literal like 5 or 6 minutes that there would be in between the contractions. And I would wake up, have a contraction. My husband was right next to me. I would have him squeeze my hips, and I would just yell through the contraction. And then as soon as it was done, I would like grab my pillow, lay my head back down, and that's literally what I did for hours and hours. Bless my husband's heart, because he was up with me every single contraction, squeezing my hips or getting me heating pads, anything. At this point, we were just trying anything because I still didn't think I was in labor. I was trying to stick it out as long as I could because I didn't want to be sent home again. So they gave me the Percocet, and it actually slowed down my contractions enough to where like I labored through the night. Well, that morning, this is the morning of the 23rd, I call labor and delivery and I say, hey, I just wanted some clarification. Last night I was in labor. I came to L&D, and I was 3 centimeters, and I was having contractions and stuff. They gave me Percocet and they slowed down my labor. I just want to know like what that means. And they literally told me that means you're not in labor. This means like you're not actually in labor. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, because they're starting to pick back up, and they're like, yeah, that just means that this isn't real labor, and like you'll just, just kind of keep going, like let us know if they get to a certain point or whatever. Literally the entire morning, I was trying everything. I was trying essential oils. I was trying you know, breathing techniques. I was doing that like low moan that worked so well with my first son's labor. I labored till about 6 or 7 centimeters on Pitocin with my first son, and so a lot of that like low grumbly moaning like helped when I was breathing through the contractions and stuff. And so at this point I had been in labor for about 2 days. At about noon, I vividly remember looking at my husband and being like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I think, like, are you okay if we go again? Like, I'm sorry that I keep dragging you out. And he's like, sure. He's like, absolutely. Like, this is your call. This is your play. You tell me when you want to go and we'll go. So we get into the car. We end up at labor and delivery. We had to actually stay in the waiting room for a little bit before they got me a room to be checked. And so I'm like trying to be really polite about like my contractions, but I'm also like during them in this waiting room. And there's like another mom that's like looking at me like, oh my God. And so we get into the room. They knew that I had been there several times before, and so they don't hook me up to any monitors or anything. They're like, let's go ahead and check you. Well, lo and behold, this lady sticks her hand right up there and she goes, oh, well, you're not a 3. And I'm like, shoot, did I shrink somehow? And I'm like, I look at her and I'm like, okay. And she's like, do you want to guess how far along you are? And I was like 4. And she's like, no. And my husband's like, a 5. And she's like, no. And I'm like, 6. And she's like, yeah, you're at a 6. And I'm like, holy hell. And so I swear in that moment, the clouds parted, this beautiful orchestra was singing down on this room that we're all in. And I literally say, I think I was like, yes, because I was getting somewhere. I was close. They say, yay, you're at a 6. We're gonna get you a room. So I'm like, holy crap, this is happening right now. Basically, I get admitted with our son with us and my husband. And immediately the nurse asks me right away is, what do you want as far as pain management? And literally up until I was in labor this so long, I wanted to be unmedicated and I wanted to try for a vaginal birth. Having been in labor for this long, with this much pain and being sent home so many times, I was done. So I told her I want an epidural, and she's like, do you want it like now? Do you want it later? And I'm like, no, I want it like right now. And so she called anesthesia, and literally I had it within an hour. It was amazing. It felt good. I was finally able to rest a little bit. We coordinated somebody to pick Matt up and take care of him, and then we had somebody else pick him up from that place and was spending the night with him. So Matt was squared away. All my job was to have this baby at this point. And so I labored for 8 or 10 hours. I was admitted around 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. and I ended up having Dean the next day at 10 a.m. And so now I probably labored for about 12 to 15 hours. Lo and behold, I made it all the way to 9 centimeters this time, and there was a part of my cervix that would not flatten out. And with Matt, my firstborn, it was like on one side, but with Dean, it was all the way around. There was just like a tiny bit of cervix that wouldn't flatten. And we waited and we waited and we tried to give it time. And the people at the hospital were amazing and so patient with me because they knew that this had happened with my first son, and they said, hey, listen, we don't want you to have a bad birth experience. We don't want you to be kicking yourself after this, so let us know how we can help you. Do you want to wait a couple hours? Will that make you feel better, like, you know, in the long run if you give it some time? And I spoke with the OB that was on call, and I asked her, and I'm like, listen, just be straight up with me. Like, what's the likelihood of this part of my cervix magically flattening out if this happened with my other son? Is this just the way I am? And she's like, honestly, I think this is just your body. This is just the way your body does it. It stops right here, and it's happened before. And at this point, I think the likelihood of it flattening out is pretty low. And so she said, the team is here. We can do a cesarean and just get it done. But I don't want you to feel like, you know, regret or anything like that. And she's like, so we can wait as long as you and baby are fine. We can wait as long as you want. And I thought about it, and me and my husband talked about it, and I said, you know what? This is the second time this has happened to me. I think this is just how my body responds to labor. So we decided on a cesarean. They were very fast. I think I decided at like 8:30, and I ended up having my kiddo at like 10:06. So I knew what I was going into, so I was a little less scared, and I wasn't disappointed, which I thought I would be. I thought I would be like completely shattered if I had a second cesarean, and I wasn't, just because I knew I almost feel like I got some closure knowing that this is just my body. Like, it's not because of my babies. It's not because I did anything wrong. I actually went into labor on my own, and this is just still how my body is. And so if that's the case, then that's the case, and it's fine. Okay, so me and my husband kiss, and I'm like, see you on the other side, basically. So the surgery begins, and the OB that is operating on me starts making a comment about how much scar tissue I have. In the back of my mind, I started to feel like there was like a lot going on, like a lot of tugging, a lot of pulling, and all this stuff. And eventually they said that it was because of the scar tissue. She made a comment that she was glad that this wasn't an emergency C-section, because she was having a really, really hard time getting through all of this. Because of all this scar tissue, once they actually made it through, my bladder was in a surprising spot, which made them have to kind of move up a little bit. And unfortunately for me, my epidural wasn't that high. The anesthesiologist, he was doing what he could, and he was very apologetic, and I was just kind of like, just ready for it to be done, because it was very painful. They reached the baby, and they're, you know, telling us like, okay, like, we get ready, you know, baby's about to be born, blah, blah, blah. So my husband looks over the drape, sees baby, and he exits fine. This is where like it starts to get a little bit weird, because they had to tell me that he was out because I couldn't hear him. He wasn't crying, he wasn't making any noise, and everybody was kind of like oohing and awing, but nobody was saying anything. And I remember turning my head and asking my husband, is he okay? Is he fine? Like, because I couldn't hear him crying. Everything was just kind of like a blur at this point, because I knew he was out, but I wasn't sure if he was okay. I didn't really know what was going on. And then I remember the anesthesiologist asking if Dad could go over and see him. I remember asking, like, is he okay? And my anesthesiologist being like, oh, he's just having a hard time breathing right now. Well, as this is going on, stuff is transpiring with my son. Well, they also have an issue with me as I'm laying down, you know, still open. They're realizing that my catheter bag is full of blood. So I'm bleeding out of my bladder, I guess. The anesthesiologist tells me that there is damage to my bladder, I'm guessing from being in labor. So he is telling me that they are just making sure that there's not a hole in my bladder. And so what they end up doing is pouring sterile infant formula into my bladder to make sure it doesn't spill into my abdomen, meaning that there would be a hole. They pour it in there, it doesn't spill, there's no hole, there's just damage, it will resolve, it'll heal, it's fine. Meanwhile, while they're figuring that out, my husband comes back over to me and is telling me that Dean wasn't breathing on his own, that he inhaled meconium and his amniotic fluid. And so there was a lot of gunk happening in his like chest and in his airways. So they were using the CPAP machine to force oxygen in, and then they were suctioning out what they could. And my husband, when he told me that, like it freaked me out. I mean, I'm not gonna like sugarcoat that. It freaked me out because I thought, you know, like something was really, really wrong. I thought it was like more grave than it was. And so I kind of went into hysterics a little bit, but they were still resolving my bladder issues. And so I'm like laying there just like crying because I couldn't really comprehend what was happening because, you know, you can't see it for yourself. My husband is going back and forth between me and the baby, and eventually the anesthesiologist tells me that they're gonna have to take my babe to the nursery. And he said, you're not gonna be able to hold him or see him, but we'll just kind of like pass him by you, so make sure, like look over there so you don't miss it, so you can see your baby as he leaves. The ped team was really motivated and very, you know, it was an urgent situation, and so they didn't even stop while passing by me. They just like whisked him out. I didn't see him, still don't know what he looks like at this point. And my husband goes with them. So I'm laying here during my surgery, and I feel really bad for the team because they were trying to like not make light of the situation, but they were trying to cheer me up and trying to make it seem like everything was fine and everything's okay. And, you know, my anesthesiologist was trying to talk to me through it. And I'm like trying not to be a blubbling mess because I trust who was taking care of my baby, but at the same time, it's still like, I'm not with him, and so what else is there to do besides just cry and like worry? So eventually they, you know, resolve what was happening. They sew me up and everything's fine, and it did take a lot longer because of that like bladder damage. So they moved me over to the other bed, the hospital bed, and they sit me up kind of, and it's just different like leaving an OR without your baby than with it, because with Matt, after my cesarean, I was the one, or I wasn't, no, yeah, I was holding him, and you know, was able to take like a family picture, and then they put him in the bassinet, and we were being wheeled to our recovery room, and he was right behind me. And then this time it was just me, and like my husband's not even with me, my kid's not with me, like, you know, I'm just kind of like this sad mom just crying in her bed. And so they wheel me to where the nursery is, and they're like, oh, if you look through the door you might be able to see him. Still could not see him, had my contacts in and everything, and still could not see my own kid. So they take me to my room, and I'm in there for probably about an hour before my husband finally comes in. And I thought he was just there to see me, but he actually came in and was like, oh, we have somebody, and Dean was with him, thank God. And so he wheels Dean in, or the nurse wheels Dean in, and I get to hold him and see him for the first time, and he was just the sweetest, just a cutie pie through and through. And they ended up telling me that he was okay, and that slowly but surely he was making progress from when he was born. And so he was born not breathing, not crying, not breathing on his own, and slowly you know, they were able to take his breathing tube out, and then they were able to stop the CPAP, and then they were able to stop the suction and all those kind of things. And so everything slowly started to resolve, but it was really, really scary at first, because living in Alaska, we don't have as many facilities as like somebody in the lower 48 would have. And so there was like talk of transferring him to Anchorage, which is, you know, 6 hours away, or flying, you know, it would be flying him to Anchorage or flying him to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, which is just down the street, but they have a NICU. But like, so there was a really good chance of him having to be separate of me you know, for a good amount of time. And even the pediatrician told my husband, like, I haven't seen many babies like recover like this quickly from this. And so there was this huge expectation that, like, you know, he was probably gonna have to be flown out somewhere, and which would have meant like my husband would have gone with him and I would be in the hospital by myself until I was discharged, and then I would be able to go and join them. And so it was all just really crazy. And I remember texting my mom and my family and saying, like, you know, this is what's going on. The surgery kind of went sideways. Dean wasn't breathing. You know, please pray for us and that kind of thing. And so, you know, I guess it was just, you know, God's plan for Dean to come in and make a splash and, you know, be a little troublemaker. For those of you that like don't know, I don't think I've ever talked about this like on my Instagram or anything. Well, no, yeah, on my Instagram, but not on YouTube. But I almost miscarried Dean as well, and so it just seems like this is like kind of his thing. He kind of just is a little bit of a troublemaker. So all in all, after Dean joined me back in the recovery room, everything was going really, really great. I was recovering really well. I was up and moving around and doing what I could, and Dean was eating really, really well, enough to where my milk came in the second day. And so everything was going well. We ended up coming home, and then like fast forward a little bit, I was still dealing with a lot of swelling in my legs, and I'll have to make maybe a second video on this, but I ended up with a blood clot in my leg. And so now I'm that's the last little bit of my recovery with this labor and delivery story, is just that I am now dealing with like some issues with like internal medicine and, you know, doing this anticoagulant therapy. Now, having had 2 cesareans, basically having the same labor and delivery story with my first and second kid, my husband and I are thinking about waiting quite a bit before the 3rd baby. We always wanted a big family, but I always told him, as long as my labor and deliveries stay easy, we can have them close in age. But this one definitely made me want to wait a little bit, just because of everything that happened. I feel like emotionally and physically my body just needs a break. So that was the labor and delivery story of Dean. He is now 2.5 weeks old. He's doing great. No long-term effects of what happened when he was born is inhibiting him at all, and shouldn't inhibit him at all. He's doing great, gaining weight, doing all the baby things. I'm still, you know, postpartum, and my hormones are still leveling out and stuff, but otherwise I feel really, really good. And I'm off most of my pain medication, which is such a relief because I was on it for much longer with my first son, and I'm just happy to be like off so much medication. I'm gonna go ahead and end this video. My boys should be waking up soon, and one is gonna need a nurse and the other one is gonna need probably a sippy cup. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Now that I have 2 kids under 2, I will be pushing out lots of mommy content, all the tips and tricks as I learn them. And maybe doing a labor and delivery story of my other son, if you want it. Lots of clean with me's, and maybe some vlogs if I can get that going. So leave any suggestions you have in the comments below. Like I said, subscribe, and give this video a thumbs up if you found this story entertaining. And I appreciate you watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. So, hello.